High fly ball into right field. She is gone. In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened. This one by Mattingly. Oh, hang on to the roof. Goodbye home run. Don Mattingly. Tucker waits one. Deep left field. Down the line. That ball is out of here. Out of here.
Welcome back to yet another episode of Tablesetters, covering all things Major League Baseball. As always, I'm Steve, joined my tag team partner, Devin. What's going on, man?
What's going on? It's the NL Central episode here. Start off with a little fact for you. No team from the NL Central has made it to the World Series since 2016. Obviously, a very memorable World Series, Cubs breaking the streak that year. But no NL Central team has made it there since then. So all the fans of an NL Central team that are listening to this tonight are hoping that this is the year that changes.
So we talk about historical significance, and this is one of the more historically significant divisions in all of baseball. For nearly 150 years, this division has been one of the most historic and competitive divisions in all of baseball. Four of the five franchises dated back to the 19th century. The Cubs, of course, the Cardinals, the Pirates, and the Reds. But the dominance has come from one of the youngest franchises in the group to the modern success. Back-to-back division titles, 2023 and 2024, those Milwaukee Brewers. So you mentioned before, no World Series appearances outside of the Cubs there. They have lacked a true dominant force in recent years. Unpredictable races. We'll talk about this no different this year in 2025. Multiple teams hovering around the 500 mark. And it feels like, and we will not bury the lead here, I think that we are going to have an emergence of a team that will kind of take the grip of this division and maybe have the hold of it for a couple more years.
It's a possibility, man. It's very hard to get the Brewers on the mat and hold them down for a 3 count. So it's hard to count them out, but I think we're going to open the episode here with those Cubbies that we've mentioned a few times. Big moves, big splashes this offseason. Obviously, none bigger than bringing Kyle Tucker to the Windy City. A huge move. I mean, they gave up a good amount to get him. I feel like it was rather equal in the circumstances, but considering that Chicago knows they have him for just 1 year, and we're not sure about after that. We all know what happened with Juan Soto in that position with the Yankees last year. Just ended up being 1 year. He gave up a pretty good amount. So they want to capitalize this year. Let's say that. And just a few weeks ago, we had a great interview with Cole Wright, who is a host on Marquee Network for the Cubs pregame, postgame. And he made a few good points that I'm sure we're going to repeat tonight. And I want to start with this. To me, one thing he brought up stands out, and I'll be watching all season when I'm paying attention to the Cubs in the National League Central. The Cubs lost 23 one-run games last year. They were 21-23 in those games. They blew 29 saves on the year. And I remember Cole telling us, like, think about it. If they just turned a few of those around, like you don't have to say like 20 of the 29 blown saves, less than that. Just a few of them. Who knows what would have happened in that division or in a wild card scenario. So to me, even though Kyle Tucker is the big story, and we were definitely going to talk about how his presence can affect this lineup, I'll be watching the bullpen and also just overall how the team performs in those close games toward the end of games. Ryan Pressly acquired as well for Chicago. As of now, it sounds like he is the leading candidate to take that closer role. Porter Hodge in the mix. They have a few other guys in the mix that can step in big situations, but I'm guessing the vet is going to get it. Pressly taken out of the 9th inning by Houston last year because of the Josh Hader signing. The thing is, putting him back in the 9th, does that get his mojo back? There are statistics, including his K percentage, that have gone pretty steadily down the last couple of years. So we'll see if that is enough, that adrenaline is enough to kind of get Ryan Pressly back, because the last thing they need is another guy back there blowing a bunch of saves or some close games. So that's, to me, what sticks out. As far as when you think about the Cubs, what are you looking at this year?
Well, the bullpen was something I was going to discuss, but you hit the nail on the head with Ryan Pressly. But I have to discuss the Kyle Tucker thing that you alluded to before and the notable acquisition. I love their lineup prior to Kyle Tucker. You look at the versatility, the Seiya Suzuki, Nico Horner, Christopher Morel, Matt Shaw in the middle of that lineup. And then you add this formidable presence in that lineup coming off a season 2024, hitting 35 home runs, stealing 22 bases. and feels like we haven't seen the best of Kyle Tucker. You mentioned the comparison with this free agent year. He's motivated. He doesn't seem like he has the same shine that Juan Soto has, but for whatever reason. But let's not get anything twisted. This is a consistent offensive threat every time he steps up to the plate. And looking at the slugging percentage, the on base, everything you want from a franchise player, the Cubs have in spades this year. And it's right on a plate for them to potentially take this Central and go away with it. And it's interesting looking at just the combo of talent. I mean, we look at Seiya Suzuki last year, played in 130 games. We can hope we can get a little bit more out of him this year. Maybe they can hope to get a little bit more than the 18 home runs and 78 RBIs. I think they want more than that. And I think the ceiling is a little bit bigger. Nico Horner is another player as well. Played 150 games last year. And another player, again, that's a threat on those base paths, can really tear up the defense on the other side. And I like really this combo of power and speed and depth. And let's mention youth as well with Matt Shaw, because the emerging talent there, I mean, everyone is anticipating him to make a significant impact this upcoming season. Will they be patient? Will they rush him there? I'm curious to see where we stand potentially by like May 30th. Where's Matt Shaw in this lineup? Because I have a feeling that him and Tucker can become good friends in that offensive lineup, batting near each other.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we've gotten the word that he will be traveling to Tokyo with them, so it sounds like they're giving him a shot. I'm also interested in Dansby Swanson. I would call him kind of the constant. Had a kind of a rough year for a while there last year, but like his floor is higher than most people. So even in a bad year, like he's still going out there, giving you good defense, playing his heart out. He's still a positive presence, and he had core muscle surgery after the season to address an issue that I'm guessing affected his performance pretty, a good amount last season. So to see him come back out, hopefully healthy, unrestricted, I think that's exciting. Not something that Cub fans are talking about, because you're talking about Imanaga, and you're talking about the new acquisitions, obviously Kyle Tucker, and we're talking about Pete Crow Armstrong, who is electric in spring training and just annoying on the base paths. Obviously, maybe the best center fielder right away as soon as he steps on the field defensively in the game. So like Dansby Swanson kind of under the radar, but he was a huge acquisition just a few years back. And I think he's probably due for a bounce back year. And the thing, if you get to the deadline, the Cubs still, even though they traded some pieces away from their system, they still have a lot of guys in that system. So if they're where they want to be, and there's a couple big fish, say starting pitchers out there, I would expect them to double down, especially again, since Kyle Tucker is not guaranteed to be here after this year. So if it's a Sandy Alcantara that's available, a Dylan Cease, someone else that we're not thinking about yet, I think they're going to make a bid for sure to try to cash these chips in and get back to the World Series for the first time since 2016. I think they have a shot, man. Like there's a part of me, even though the NL East is loaded, there's a part of me that on paper and the style of play thinks that the Cubs might be the most dangerous team opposing the Dodgers.
Yeah, and I look at Justin Steele as well. We mentioned the year last year. Everyone was heaping praise on him. 15-3, 2.9 ERA. Can he repeat that again with the 174 strikeouts and 173 innings? Like we look at Justin Steele, and I think this team is deep enough and diverse enough to overcome if Justin Steele takes a step back this year. And I think everyone's expecting him to probably, I wouldn't say come back to earth, but I mean, last year was just insane for what we got for him. So you take the combo of Justin Steele, Shota Imanaga, as you mentioned before, and then the improved bullpen. And now looking at the offense, clearly improved, a more well-rounded team. They're not one-dimensional as they were in years past. I believe like since they broke up that core, the Chris Bryants and the Anthony Rizzos and the Javi Baez core that only got that one ring, it feels like they became a little bit one-dimensional. And you can even argue, and we had a conversation here years ago, not even before Tablesetters, about when they were building Wrigleyville and how, unfortunately for them, the COVID shortened season happened and there wasn't any fans. So they really had to limit the amount of money they could spend. So it kind of expanded the time that they were, I wouldn't say non-competitive, because they did field some competitive teams in those down years, quote unquote. But this is the first time we're looking at a Cubs team since you mentioned before 2016, where they're a formidable force in the National League, where they can go out there and you can take a look at the aggressive offseason, but they have the base there already. Pete Crow Armstrong, the Matt Shaws. There's a big contingency of people were excited prior, and then you add on top of that Presley, you add on top of that Kyle Tucker. There's a lot of excitement in Chicago, and you look at the other side of town. We'll preview it tomorrow in the next episode. it's just like it's night and day at this point. And it really is. They're clearly owning the town. And it's got to be miserable for White Sox fans to watch what the Cubs are doing, because they're emerging out of this rebuild, quote unquote, or reimagining. I don't think it was a full rebuild. And now the Cubs are looking at potentially to be a legit contender for a World Series ring this year.
Yeah, and even we've kind of alluded to it. Like, they still have pieces down in AAA. Kevin Alcantara, like, someone, if he's either a Cub or somewhere else because they trade him for another piece, like, he has the potential to be a beast somewhere one day. They've Triantos down there, Owen Casey, Cade Horton. Still, we don't know if he's going to contribute to the big league club this year. So there's other things they can do. Whether it be use these guys at the big league level or move them for pieces. And you mentioned Justin Steele. Last year was interesting for him. He all-star in 2023. That's when he kind of broke on the scene. 3.06 ERA, 1.17 WHIP. That was 173 in the third innings in 2023. Last year, similar numbers, but he was limited to 24 starts because of the hamstring strain relatively early in the season. So you want to just hope that these guys go out there and get off to a healthy and positive start. Imanaga, to me, is the guy that I expect to take a little bit of a step back. His first half of the season last year was insane. I think there's a little bit of a book now at the big league level, or over here in the United States, on Imanaga, more so than when he started. I think he caught some people by surprise. He's going to give up home run balls as well. Don't get me wrong. I think he's still an all-star caliber pitcher. But of those two guys, I knew you mentioned Steele maybe taking a step back. I see Imanaga as the more likely one. But as far as pitching goes, we got to talk about one place. And if we're going to talk about the Cubs maybe taking the Central away from someone, well, the team that they would be taking it away from is the Milwaukee Brewers. And to go with the pitching stuff, they just seem to always get the most out of their pitchers. And last year, it was one guy after the next that went down for them. And it just didn't seem to matter. Like, they would just continue churning along, next man up mentality. When you look at the Brewers roster this year, are you worried, or do you feel they're just going to do it again? It doesn't seem to matter who walks out that door.
I mean, that's the age-old question here. It feels like the Brewers are the team you mentioned that cannot be pinned down to the mat no matter what happens. You look at the significant roster changes that happened over the course of this offseason, losing Willy Adames and what he brought to the table, and then Devin Williams as well. There is a solid core there, of course. I mean, you look at Christian Yelich, he feels like an X factor here. Injuries limiting his play on the field. If he's able to get a full season out there, what can he bring to the table? But you have to look at the emerging young talent. Jackson Chourio comes to mind immediately. Garrett Mitchell as well. Like, you look at both those players, are both players that you're looking at as being a threat that could replace some of the offense we saw from Willy Adames. And the roster uncertainty as well. And I know obviously Corbin Burns wasn't in-house last year, but there feels like there is still a shifting of seats of who's going to be the ace, and acquiring Nestor Cortez, Jose Quintana, like bolstering the rotation, quote unquote bolstering. If you guys are watching the video, I'm putting on quotes. It doesn't feel like any of these guys are a cornerstone type of player for the rotation. So immediately look at that of being like, okay, well, who's going to be the ace of this staff? And I love Nestor. I think Nestor has a lot to offer. But he's coming off of that World Series, and I'm hoping for his sake that the Freddie Freeman stuff doesn't define who he is. We see that happen. I'm not saying it was a Bill Buckner moment, but I think when you think Nestor Cortez, especially as a Yankee fan right now, I think unfortunately of that grand slam, and it's not his fault. Probably shouldn't have been in that position, but that's a rant for another time. But I like this team. I mean, William Contreras as well might be the best catcher in all of baseball. So there is a chance where you could look at them three-peating for this division title. It wouldn't shock me because of just what the Brewers are. But I think, honestly, looking at just what the Cubs did compared to what the Brewers lost, it's a simple math equation. I mean, the offseason moves address some of the needs. It doesn't feel like they're going to be able to maintain that edge, but we've been wrong before, right? Like, that's the other thing with these Brewers. We've been wrong. So how can we completely count them out?
Yeah, you can't count them out. I mean, they're going to play a style of play similar to, like we talked about, the D-backs a couple of days ago in the NL West, the Guardians, like that type of baseball where they're not going to necessarily slug you to death, but they're going to use the fundamentals. They're going to play good defense, try to put the ball in play, and run. They're going to run. They got some speed there. You mentioned Garrett Mitchell, man. To me, he's a fascinating player. I look at Garrett Mitchell, obviously has been snake bitten by lots of injuries. So I think only played like 80-something games over the last 2 seasons combined. But when he's out there, he's impressive. Like, to me, he represents a guy, if he can just stay healthy, I feel like if he can put it all together, he's a potential star on that team. I mean, last year in just 69 games, he hit 8 home runs, 11 stolen bases. The strikeout percentage is still high, around 30%, which is 31.7 last year, which actually represented an improvement. But if that can continue to come down and he can stay on the field, passes the eye test and a lot of the analytics as well. The outfield is crowded, though. Like, he'll be in the mix, obviously. You got Blake Perkins there, Sal Frelick. You mentioned Christian Yelich, who obviously they're going to want to spend some time at DH, but Jackson Chourio obviously leading the way, an absolute stud. The youngsters, man, like this team, it just always seems like it's about the young dudes and what they're going to turn into, what they're going to get out of these guys, how they're going to mix and match them. I mean, Joey Ortiz is a guy I find interesting. Great defender. They got him from the Orioles in the Corbin Burns trade. I expect him to be the starting shortstop. He was the third baseman most of the time last year while Adames was there. He could be great at shortstop there. I have read that apparently they're not decided between him and Bryce Terang at short. Like, it could go to either of them. Either way, Ortiz is going to be in that lineup most days, whether he's playing short or third or something else. But yeah, man, the Brewers are just a fascinating squad. I can't exactly say I'm bullish on them this year, because it's like, how many years can they let these big guys walk out the door and just continue doing it? Their season also ended in devastating fashion. Devin Williams leaves afterwards. So I know they seem to just churn out new relief pitchers. Like when Hader left, Williams just stepped in, and then other guys stepped in Williams' spot. And it seems like that's going to continue. Like, they just produce relievers. I wonder if a Jacob Misiorowski, who's been a top 100 prospect for a while, comes up at some point. His profile is interesting. He throws hard as hell, and he is originally like a starting pitcher prospect, but there have been some rumors out there that, if they need him, bring him up and turn him into some type of reliever, at least for a little while. There have been guys successful where they start their major league career as reliever and then eventually transition to the starter that they're always supposed to be. But yeah, Garrett Mitchell is the guy I'm really watching out of everybody. I think he's got 2020 potential, maybe more if everything hits correct. And that's what the Brewers do. Like, suddenly you think they're down because someone leaves, and then a new guy just becomes a star. So Brewers, we'll see. Again, not bullish here, but I just feel like they're the kind of team that I'm going to be eating crow about it in a few months.
Yeah, and I think that's just the archetype of what this division has been for a long period of time. So it's not just a 1 year off thing. Whereas I mentioned upon the intro, there has been a lot of inconsistency, a lot of hovering around 500, a shifting of seats of who's dominant of this division. It hasn't really been, I mean, outside of the, I think back of the Cardinals run that they had years back, but it hasn't been that division. I mean, even when the Brewers won the last 2 years, it felt like it was very much in question throughout the year. So, I agree with you. I think at any point, if you're to look at things went really right for the Brewers, there's enough talent on this team for us to be like, all right, well, things went really right. Can they have over 90 wins again? I mean, they finished last year at 93 wins, right? So, I mean, if the magic number for this division is what, 94 wins to win this division, who's to say Milwaukee can't be right back there? And, they did that coming off a year losing a lot of talent going into 2024. So it's the same old story here at the Brewers. It's a matter of these other teams stepping up. And for the offseason, the Cubs did just that. And also the Cincinnati Reds did as well. And I feel like that's the next team to lead into here with everything that we saw with them. The story, obviously, we had Mike Petraglia on here talking about Terry Francona, and Gavin Lux was fresh off that news, but they're aiming to improve upon a 77 and 85 record. And I feel like we don't talk about the record they had last year just because of how exciting they were in spurts, the youthful exuberance. I feel like Elly De La Cruz represents everything that's right in baseball. He's spearheading the effort there. You think that they're on the cusp of something special. We saw Elly, of course, showcasing speed and power, you firsthand with fantasy baseball, watching him on a nightly basis. This is what it means to be a baseball player in 2025. It's Elly De La Cruz. And then add on top of that, you get the expertise of bringing the most out of your players with Terry Francona, a wealth of experience. He's done nothing but win every single place he has gone to, changing the culture of the clubhouse. That's what the Reds have needed for a long period of time. And I think that's enough to give them a strategic edge that could, I mean, what do you think Francona is good for? 10 wins, 12 wins? Like, are we looking at that type of player? If we're wins above replacement for a manager, I feel like he's good enough to win these closer games and get the most out of your players. So, we'll talk about the young talent on this team, but I think the two big stories is Elly De La Cruz and Terry Francona.
That's exactly when I'm writing notes for this and kind of coming up with questions for each team and positives and negatives. Those are the two things I wrote. Does Ellie take the next step? And is the Terry Francona factor real? And I think 99% of the people, if they're real baseball fans that you ask that question, would say yes. Now, how many games, how many wins he's good for, extra wins? That's an interesting question. If it's 10, I think they win the division, to be honest. If he is worth 10 extra wins, I think the Reds win the division this year. And that's not my final prediction. We're going to get to that at the end, but I'm just saying if. The other question I will say I have is, can the pitching stay healthy? I like this pitching staff on paper, and they do actually have some depth to it now. Brady Singer acquired. He's a little bit unpredictable. He's been a little bit all over the place in his career as far as his results. Ground ball pitcher when he's at his best, so that's a good thing in that, ballpark where the ball just flies out. I will say the guy I'm really watching, Hunter Green, obviously a little injury issue at the end where he didn't necessarily put the full group of starts together, but more durable than prior years. And man, when he was out there, he started to really look like the guy that we've been expecting for a few years now, when his hype train first started. So I love him. I love his profile. Nick Lodolo, when he first came up a couple of years ago, he showed some absolute dominance. It wasn't a full season, but his first rookie season under a 4 ERA, he was impressive. Since then, he has been wildly inconsistent. And I think you can attribute most of that to just being in and out, injuries, right? Never really putting a long spurt of starts together. To me, he's a huge X factor. He's clearly not the only X factor. But when I talk about the pitching staff staying healthy, he's really the guy I'm talking about. Like, can he stay healthy and figure out how to be a pitcher that can give you 5-6 innings when he's out there? Because there have been times, even when he's nasty, he just can't figure out how to just like pitch. It's almost like, there's throwers and there's pitchers. A guy that can get you to whiff, but he's just throwing way too many pitches to get an out. That's a thrower. He needs to learn how to be, a pitcher and kind of use those pitches in an intelligent way. So if Lodolo can have a year for them, I mean, I mentioned the Francona if Lodolo can be out there for the majority of the season, look out.
Yeah, same thing with Andrew Abbott as well. You look at some of the numbers we've seen from him, highly touted prospect. He's been wildly inconsistent as well. You look at some of the steamer projections for him. It doesn't look like he's going to have that breakout year according to advanced statistics. But again, you look at some of the stuff, obviously a guy that they liked from the jump. Development hasn't gone the way they wanted to, but there's a lot of talent here. And you mentioned Brady Singer. I mean, I've been a huge proponent of Brady Singer. You can go back in my archives I wrote an article about Brady Singer singing a new tune, adding some new pitches to his repertoire about 2 years ago for Pitcher List. One of my first articles I did about it was about Brady Singer. I did a deep dive into his repertoire, and I fully believe he has a skill set that could be a difference maker. And if you find a way to maximize whatever he's bringing to the table, I just, it's hard to imagine it didn't happen in Kansas City, especially for what we see. I mean, what they get at Cole Reagans and what they got out of Seth Lugo. But for whatever reason, Brady Singer never could fully maximize his potential. But you would see it in spurts some nights. And I think the eye test can't be discounted when you watch some of these pitchers, because the year that Corbin Burns, the end of the year that Burns had his breakout, and I vividly remember this because we were going into the fantasy baseball draft the year, and I had taken Burns and I had said he's going to win the Cy Young that year. And I had the same feeling about Brady Singer because they both were having parallel years of hot spurts. I think it was like 6 or 7 starts to end the year. And honestly, I was very impressed with Corbin Burns, but I was just as impressed with Brady Singer. And Brady Singer obviously took a dive, and Corbin Burns, we know the history here. He has that fruitful deal for the Diamondbacks all these years later. But going back here, I mean, we touched about Gavin Lux, and we did talk about this with Mike Petraglia again. He was talking about Lux because it was so fresh. And Lux feels like that Francona player. Like he got the guy he wanted to kind of plug and play. He's that kind of grindstone type of dude who can be on the field and just a winning type of player. And I do believe Francona is going to get the best out of all these guys here. There's a lot of talent on this team. And even when we look at this Reds team from last year, like I said, under 500 by a significant margin, and it feels like they shouldn't be. Because you mentioned some of the names, the Nick Lodolos, the Hunter Greens, the Ellie De La Cruz. How is this team not winning close to 85 games just by sheer talent? And I think by that, the improvement should be there because they weren't maximizing what they were doing on the field. And with Francona to the mix, I feel like he's going to pull all of that out of them.
Yeah, that's why he's there. And here for him, with all the health issues that he's had, that's kind of taken him away from the game. Even when he was still managing, he'd be gone for weeks at a time, certain times of the season for health stuff. For him to decide to come back, like, he's got to believe in the team, and clearly he does. Matt McClain is another huge piece. Like, here's the thing, like, pitching health, big X factor. Terry Francona, big X factor. A guy like Matt McClain, Gavin Lux, huge. I mean, Gavin Lux is an acquisition. Matt McClain feels like an acquisition because he was gone all year last year. Christian Encarnacion Strand, who looks better this spring, and at first we weren't sure if he was going to have a spot in the lineup. There's some stuff going on with Spencer Steer. So as of now, Christian Encarnacion Strand, probably the opening day first baseman. When he's right, he can hit light tower power. So, I mean, that wouldn't shock me. He's kind of been forgotten about, another post type dude. But the ultimate X factor on this team is Elly De La Cruz's development. Like, he's impressive, but people want him to hit the ball in the air a little more, less on the ground, and obviously strikeout rate. Now, spring, it sure as hell looks like he's just going to keep on chugging right along in that advancement towards just MVP type of numbers. But when the regular season bright lights hit, that can be a little different sometimes. Spring training numbers can be very deceiving. You know, sometimes you might be out there against a pitcher who's not going to be a big league guy. So some numbers get inflated. And it goes both ways. Other guys who struggle in spring training, it doesn't mean a thing. They're just kind of working on stuff. But yeah, for me, if I'm leaving it on one thing, it's Elly. And just a quick thing, trade deadline. If I had to predict now, I think the Reds will be in a spot where they do a little bit of adding, like around the edges, maybe some bullpen stuff, some minor stuff. But I see them being in a spot, as long as the health is okay, because they've just suffered from so many injuries offensively and pitching wise last year.
So we talk about these teams with clear directions. The three of those teams, we mentioned the Brewers, the Cubs, obviously going on with everything they're doing, you feel like there's a direction. The St. Louis Cardinals, on the other hand, they're entering a state of transition here. You know, they're looking at their veteran core. They felt like they've been trying to move Arenado all offseason. There's some youth in this lineup as well. We'll talk about some of the bright spots there. And you look at 2024, it wasn't just a disappointing campaign for them. It felt like it was listless. And that's like, for the Cardinals, they pride themselves on being boring to a point where they're so good they're boring at all times. It was the exact opposite last year. The offseason continued it in the same way, conservative, and they're not committing fully to the rebuild, nor are they aggressively trying to upgrade their roster. So it feels like they're in a state of flux, and they're stuck in the middle, and they're capable of competing. If you look at the lineup on any day, they're lacking firepower. They're lacking that oomph. And I guess that used to be good enough to win the National League Central, if you really think about it. But for the Cardinals, it has to be very frustrating, because you look at the vets on this team, namely Sonny Gray, ace of the rotation. He brings some valuable leadership. Nolan Arenado, he's a begrudging member of this ship. He's still on it right now. He's strapped in. He wasn't able to be moved. And Miles Mikolas has, of course, stability there. And the other thing that I feel like can hold them afloat a little bit, I'm curious your thought on this, is the trio of Gray, Mikolas, and Steven Matz, giving them a workable rotation to potentially, I wouldn't say dominate, but keep themselves in games. And then on top of it, a lot has to break right with the young talent. We talked a lot about Jordan Walker, talk a lot about Mason Wynn. Are they able to show that full potential and get out there? That, at the very least, for the most optimistic Cardinal fan, if you think you get a great year out of Jordan Walker, he's finally the player you think he's going to be. Mason Wynn breaks out to be one of the best shortstops in baseball. And the trio of those guys go out there and they're, finding a way to be a solid rotation. Things could go really right. But the realist in me looks at the weaknesses and being like, this is an aging core. Nolan Arenado, Miles Mikolas, what are you going to get from him? Paul Goldschmidt's departure, although he was getting older, it does leave a major hole in the lineup, no matter how you slice it. And there is a lack of a true superstar. And it feels like the Cardinals always kind of had somebody. I mean, go back to the Pujols year, there's always one guy that was the superstar, and there's no true MVP level player right now with a game-changing type of play. Every one of these teams has that game-changing type of player. The Cardinals don't. Will it be Jordan Walker? I'm not sure. A lot of question marks for the Cardinals. And the frustrating part is like, all right, well, we're not fully rebuilding. So what are we right now?
Yeah, well, let's start with this. You mentioned the rotation, and do we think that those guys you mentioned, Sonny Gray, Miles Mikolas, Matz, maybe? I don't know if he's even going to be in there. Is he? I hate the rotation. I'm not going to mince words. Hate it. I don't know why Sonny Gray's even there still. Arenado obviously wanted out. They couldn't find a place to put him or get the return they wanted. So they'll wait a little longer, I guess. Ryan Helsley, like you couldn't find a taker for Ryan Helsley, maybe the best closer aside from Emmanuel Clase last year. You couldn't find a taker and a decent return. I find that hard to believe. I mean, he'll be on the move at the deadline. Let's just be honest, but that seems strange to me. My question for this team, and you kind of alluded to it, like they've had stars before, even though it's a team that usually wins with role players. But, Albert Pujols, Yadi Molina, offensively wasn't necessarily like putting up crazy numbers, but he was a clear leader of the team, right? An alpha. You had someone that you knew you were going to follow and go to war with every day. Arenado is certainly still a star in that dugout, in that clubhouse. He has that.
But whose jersey are they buying? You know what I mean? Like, are they buying Arenado jerseys? He doesn't want to be there. And the Cardinals, they're smart. Right. I mean, for all the grief everyone gives the Cardinals, this is a smart baseball town, and they recognize Arenado. I'm not reading the Missouri newspapers, but I'm assuming Arenado is not the most liked guy in St. Louis right now. It can't be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They always talk about St. Louis fans being the best and best. I'm not saying
best. I'm not saying best. I'm saying they're smart, so they're very aware of things going on. It's not like you have a lot of.
No, I know. I'm saying if they're the best, they should understand that he wants to get out of there. It's not
Devin, time. By the way, for those listening for the first time, Devin absolutely despises the Cardinals, so he's taking great joy out of all this. Just so everybody knows.
Yeah, sorry, but anyway, I just say I don't think there's a leader. Here's the thing: I think Mason Wynn is going to emerge as the clubhouse leader. Now, can he be an offensive force and lead that way? I don't think so. You look at some of the analytics, barrel percentage, things like that. They're a little bit unimpressive. I don't think he's going to be a below-average offensive player. I think he has the attitude, the mindset, the want to be a very good player and to continually improve. I see him as that dude who's just going to improve a little bit every year. He's an unbelievable defender, crazy arm. I like the guy a lot. So I think he's the leader. But you mentioned the name several times. Jordan Walker, for them to do anything significant this year, Jordan Walker is going to have to be the dude that we all thought he was when he was ranked, 1, 2, or 3 in the top 100 prospects for a year or two. Dude, how about this? This guy hit at home. His split at home, he hit 137 in front of the best fans in baseball.
Oh my God, here we go.
137. Like, I mean, you got to do something about that. 137. Come on now, you got to do better than that.
I mean, it was rough. I mean, we all watched it. I think every one of us in the league picked him up, thinking, "Oh, this is going to be the week he turns it around." And then everyone spends a week watching him swing, and he just couldn't hit water if he fell out of a boat type of stuff. But going back to Mason Wynn for 1 second, I heard a great comparison about him. And because they were talking about, I've been listening to a lot of fantasy prep drafts and people were talking about different players. And the best comparison I heard about Mason Wynn was he's the type of player that won't translate well fantasy wise, but he brings intangibles on the field like a Derek Jeter. And I think people took they took umbrage with that. But if you just take it for face value, there's something that Jeter used to bring to the field that couldn't be quantified in numbers and stats and points or whatever type of league you're in. Mason Wynn has this intangible gravitas that people want to be around him, and he has an infectious personality. He feels like it may be de facto at this point because by default, nobody else is going to step up, but it almost feels like he's destined to be this type of guy that defines Cardinal baseball in the next 5-6 years.
Yeah, well, and just put a bow on the Cardinals, and just for the Mason Wynn stuff. Again, I like the player a lot, but when I allude to some of the analytic kind of stuff, StatCast kind of stuff, I'll give you some concrete numbers so you don't think I'm just tossing stuff or throwing shit at the wall and hoping it sticks. Barrel percentage was 3.7%. That's pretty rough. Like I don't think you're going to be a premier offensive player with that. That's 10th percentile in the league. Hard hit percentage, not much better. He's in the 14th percentile. Average exit velocity, 14th percentile. Expected slugging, 21st percentile. I mean, there's some positives. Whiff percentage. He doesn't whiff too much. He's in the 82nd percentile there. K percentage is only 17.1% for a young player, 23 years old. That's impressive. A lot of these guys that come up at that age are all around 30%, if not more. So for him to be advanced in that department, that's good because there's a little wiggle room for him to swing a little bigger, whiff a little bit more because he's pretty good at that. He can kind of expend that, and then maybe the barrel percentage increases a little bit. Again, defensively unbelievable. Arm strength, 95th percentile. Range, 84th percentile. I'd like to see him steal more bases. He's got great sprint speed, only 11 stolen bases last year. He's a guy, 15 home runs last year, 11 stolen bases. If he has a 2020 year and say hits 260, 270, that's really solid for his third year in the majors and really only his second full year here.
So my question before we move on from the Cardinals here is, I mean, there's two scenarios here. We laid them out. The best case scenario obviously seems far-fetched at this point. The worst case, the aging stars continue to regress and all that. But my question to you, either way, this feels like a crossroads. Do you, gut feeling, feel like the front office finally embraces a rebuild at the trade deadline? Not that they have that many pieces to just shell off, but really dive deep into a 2-3 year rebuild? Or are they going to do the reimagining thing because they're too proud to go all the way in and lose, upwards of 100 games one year? Like, I just think the Cardinals have a hard time doing something like that because they are St. Louis and they are a proud franchise. But that it's right now, read the tea leaves. That's what's in the water right now. You need to figure out who you are as a team, and it might be just breaking everything down.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some rumors out there that thinking John Mozeliak last year in that role that he just wants to ride it out, and then whoever else gets their hands on them will do something different. I don't know. I don't expect them to be anywhere close at the deadline. So if there's valuable pieces that you can get something for, I think you get them. But to make these guys more interesting, get Quinn Matthews up here soon, please. Someone like that, maybe a couple other guys. It's that we can at least watch their development. But yeah, the Cardinals, I don't have a lot of hope for. And, I just want to say I'm very empathetic for the best fans in baseball.
Well, moving on to Pittsburgh over there by that beautiful yellow bridge. The Pittsburgh Pirates are entering the 2025 season with some established talent, of course, and they're still in the rebuild, but they have one of the brightest stars in all of baseball. Paul Skeens making that impact in a huge way. 2024, we saw what he did. National League Rookie of the Year, finishing third in the Cy Young voting. This guy was all as advertised, which makes it even more frustrating to watch a team like Pittsburgh go out and not really build around it. And I understand small market situation. You look at O'Neal Cruz. We talked about Ellie. We talked about some of the players that have not lived up the raw potential, the athleticism. O'Neal Cruz and Brian Reynolds, to me, represent what this Pirates lineup could potentially do. I think they are anchored by those two players, good, better, and different. They will be what those players are. And with Paul Skeens starting every fifth day, you have a streak stopper, right? So they're not going to be one of the worst teams in baseball, but there is a lack of depth behind those two players. With Cruz and Reynolds, the roster is just, you look at the team. We talked about Jordan Walker, but equal parts frustrating is Ke'Bryan Hayes. You look at the defensive prowess. He has struggled mightily offensively, and they've made minimal moves. And again, they are the Pirates. We understand that. And I get that. And you guys go back to the NL West episode. I ranted about the Rockies. I think the Pirates are a little bit more egregious because you have a franchise altering window right now to potentially do something special with a player that looks transcendent like Paul Skeens. And you're doing nothing, almost punting, expecting he's eventually going to leave instead of even unrealistic, trying your best to embrace him. Like, hey, this could be your city. You could be part of the fabric of Pittsburgh sports. And for Paul Skeens, if you're that guy and you're looking at grass being greener, why would you stay in Pittsburgh? You may like the stadium, you may like the fans, you may like the food, but they've done nothing to support you on this journey here. And I just obviously didn't do enough this offseason. They're not positioning themselves as a serious contender. And it's even more egregious year after year because, as we said before, over and over again, the NL Central has been wide open for someone to just go out there and take it. And they're not trying to win immediately. And that's frustrating. Maybe they're trying for 2026, but tomorrow is always on the horizon for them. They're never quite like, let's just do it now. And the Pirates are never right here in the moment.
Yeah, there were clear needs. We talked to Tenardo from North Shore 9. I guess that was probably pretty close to the beginning of the offseason as well. So we really got to look before the free agent frenzy started. Everyone was still available. And we got to really look all right, they need an outfielder clearly. Is a Santander a fit? Is a Jerickson Profar a fit? This guy, that guy, Tyler O'Neill. Obviously, none of those guys were even seemingly thought of by the Pirates front office. First base was a clear need. Obviously, they made a move there, and different people have different opinions on that. But now with the injury, DJ Stewart may be their opening day first baseman with Spencer Horwitz out. So you put it kind of you're being kind when you say like there's kind of like a lack of support. There's no support. It's Brian Reynolds and O'Neal Cruz. It's it. That's really it. Unless one of these guys I'm looking at just comes out of nowhere. They need more support. They need another breakout offensive player. And the place I look is the catcher position. The Pirates have just stacked former super high catching prospects. Brought over Joey Bart, who ended up being their best catcher. Henry Davis, who was the #1 overall pick for them years ago, has just not been able to do it. He's transitioned to the outfield. Maybe he's back at catcher. Hitting the ball kind of hard, all fields in spring here. Hopefully that's an encouraging sign. They also have Endy Rodriguez, who is known more for his offense, coming back from elbow surgery. Maybe he can bring a little offense there, whether he's playing catcher or they use him somewhere else because there's depth there. And you mentioned Brian Hayes. Very disappointing. A new two-handed finish, apparently, on the swing that is thought to be helpful for him. But I'm going to wait and see on that because we've just been waiting and waiting for that for a long time. But yeah, the pitching staff, it'll be exciting to watch, obviously, to see what Skeens does in his first full season. I mean, that's must-see TV. Like, there's not many pitchers over the last 10, 15 years where you're like, oh, I got to watch this game because of the guy who's starting. Like, even if it's not my team. I think you could say Skeens, Strasburg at one point. This is tough for me to know because I'm a Met fan, but I feel like there was a point where other people probably wanted to tune in and watch Jacob deGrom when he was at his peak. So guys like that, but there's not many. I mean, even Garrett Cole, you could probably throw in there for, when he was an Astro before he came to the Yankees. You look at those crazy stats, insane that 1 year he had as an Astro. So, and obviously very good as a Yankee here too. But that's what you're tuning in for. You're tuning in for Paul Skeens, Jared Jones. Mitch Keller is not a must-see TV guy, but he can go out there and light it up. Eventually, Bubba Chandler will be up here lighting it up as well. So there's things to go to the ballpark for. I can say that, which is a little better than some other teams in the league. At least there's something to go watch.
Yeah, and moving on to our X factor for this division here, and it's challenging because we mentioned a lot of players here. There's an interesting dynamic throughout the fabric of this division. I was talking before about the Cubs, and I had mentioned by mistake the 2023 stats for Steele and for Tucker. If you remember Tucker, I mean, this is a guy who we didn't see a full season from him last year, and I'm excited to see what we get out of him. I mean, just what we saw prior to the injury, and we had early on talking about the Astros early on in the season, we had H-Town Wheelhouse on, and he alluded to this Tucker injury being much more serious than it actually was, and we saw it really hamper what Tucker was able to do. So that is also part of this as well. I don't think this shin looms large at all. I'm curious to see him in a full season. I mean, that's the fallacy of the predetermined outcome at this point. Are we going to get a full season of Tucker? I hope so. You look at the 2025 projections, they are looking at 35 home runs. They're looking at 290 batting average. It's a guy who's going to get on base a lot. And they're looking at potentially a leading candidate for National League MVP. That's what projections have for him, and Steamer and all the other projections out there. So he is my X factor. I feel like if he is the guy that is as advertised, and God knows he's motivated, right? You watch what Soto got paid, and I don't think he's going to get upwards of $700 million, but with a season that is MVP level, similar. If you even get 75% of the season that Soto gave the Yankees, if Tucker gives the Cubs 75% of that, this dude's going to be paid long term. I mean, he's going to get paid anyway, but I think Tucker's motivated by that money, and he's motivated by a chance to win a ring. That's the other thing. Like, I understand, like, pair all this together. Missing time last year, obviously had to hurt him to watch the Astros as they were competitive at the end of the year, and they, he probably wanted to be full time and feel 100% himself. I think this is a guy who's motivated by a lot, and he's a quiet force. So I'm excited to see what he does, and I think he's going to be the determining factor of what happens in this division.
Well, Steve and I do not compare notes before we get on here. So when we have the same answer, it's by coincidence. And my X factor, my overall X factor, one guy affecting the division the most as a whole is Kyle Tucker as well, which is interesting because my biggest X factor for the Cubs, just as a singular team, is really the bullpen because of what happened last year that we already talked about. But as far as affecting the entire division and the results of the division, if Tucker falls short of the high expectations that you just named or fails to stay healthy, like you talked about as well, it doesn't just change the feeling of the Cubs, it changes the feel of this entire division. The Cubs with Tucker and some other things they did and some young pieces feel like a potential powerhouse. Like I said, a potential threat to the Dodgers in their style of play. If you suddenly lose him, it just makes everything feel different. So, like, there's a time to talk about numbers and there's a time to talk about feel and confidence and just vibes, right? Swagger. There's a little swagger and vibes rubbed off if your big acquisition, who again may only be here for a year, is either just not performing the way you expect or goes down. So, yeah, I think Kyle Tucker and all these guys in this division, I think Kyle Tucker is the biggest X factor for who finishes where. And that leads us into our predictions as far as the order of the teams from 1 to 5, and then how many teams we actually think are going to make the playoffs. So I'll start here with my predictions, and then I'll turn it over to you to see if we have the same answer for this one as well. I have the Cubs at the top. I think probably if you listen to this closely, the way we've talked about them, I don't think that's a surprise. I do believe in the vision they've put together for this season. So obviously health affects everything, but on paper right now on the field with the guys all these teams have going, to me, it's the Cubs number 1. This might be a surprise to some people. I do believe at least partly in the Terry Francona factor, maybe not 10 extra wins. But I have the Reds finishing second. I have the Brewers falling to third. I'm not a believer in them being able to do it again. I don't think they're going to be a bad team, but I think they fall a little short here. Pirates coming in fourth, and the Cardinals in the cellar. And as far as how many teams make the playoffs, I actually just think it's going to be the Cubs. So if you listen to the NL West episode, because again, we have to make this make sense. If you listen to 3 NL episodes, and you're like, wait a minute, they predicted like 3 teams from the West and 3 teams from the East and 2 teams from the Central. Oh, there's not that many spots. So if you didn't listen to the NL West, I said that I think the Dodgers and D-backs are coming out of the West for the playoffs. For this one, I think the Cubs are the only team. I think the Reds fall a little bit short despite finishing second, which, yes, if you do the math, when you listen to the NL East episode early next week, I do think there are 3 teams coming out of that division.
So I also have the exact division winner here. The only difference is I have the Pirates finishing last over the Cardinals, and I was tempted to put the Cardinals in the basement, but just what the Pirates are doing here, I just feel like they are the worst team in this division. I think just by muscle memory, the Cardinals will have more wins, and I do have the Reds second as well. And I think only the Cubs will make the playoffs, but man, it would be exciting if there can be playoff baseball in Cincinnati. I think that'd be a great time to see Ellie in a playoff series and some chilly weather out in Cincinnati. Bring the winning culture back over there. You know, we weren't old enough to see the Big Red Machine. Obviously, we're young kids, and some of us weren't born by then. But this was once a hotbed, one of the most historic cities in baseball. We mentioned the history of the National League. It goes through Cincinnati. So I feel like if you can restore that franchise and have them feel and bestow the importance on them just again, they're an important franchise for this league. And as far as the city goes, think about the Bengals and what they bring to the city and being competitive and when they made that Super Bowl run and all of that. The Reds are just as much tied in that culture. And you can make the argument. I know the Bengals have been really good, and I feel like the Reds, it's more of a Reds town than a Bengals town. That's more for the Cincy people to talk about. But I think I don't know, just the fabric of Cincinnati, Ohio. I mean, how do you not think it's the Reds and Joe Morgan and Pete Rose and everything that they've done throughout their historic legacy?
Yeah, I look at them and there's a part of me that thinks we might look up around the All-Star break and Matt McClain might be a household name at that point. And I think if that becomes true, maybe we think differently about whether they make the playoffs or not, because, Batman and Robin, that's what they're calling Ellie De La Cruz and Matt McClain, Batman and Robin. If Matt McClain ends up being a little more than a Robin, I mean, look out for sure. They have a chance. They have a lot of talent there.
So we appreciate you guys checking this out again. If you are just checking this one out on a one-off for episode 69, go check out episode 68 and 67. We preview the NL and the AL West, talking all things of the division, everything about those teams over there. Those are our first kicking off the division previews. And then tomorrow, stay with us, episode 70, we're going to be previewing the AL Central, and Devin's going to tell us all about why the Chicago White Sox are going to make the run of a lifetime winning that division, I'm sure. So he's going to piece it all together for everybody over here. But no, we will be making our predictions for the American League Central, and a very fascinating division. Bobby Witt Jr., can't wait to have that conversation. But we will be back tomorrow talking all things in our divisional preview. Make sure to follow us on Instagram and X at Tablesetters Pod. Leave a 5-star review if you're liking what we're doing. We are on the road to baseball season. Get everybody on board. Join the club over here. Engage with us. Have a conversation, because we are at this point a week away from the Tokyo series as we're recording. So pretty damn exciting.
Let's go, baby. Let's go.
So we'll be back tomorrow talking about our further division previews, and we will talk to you after a while.